The first light of dawn stretched long shadows across the fence posts, painting the Wyoming grassland in shades of copper and dust. Thomas Brennan counted the calves one more time, his breath forming small clouds in the morning chill. 37. Same as last night, despite the wolf tracks he'd found near the eastern ridge. The Winchester across his saddle had kept watch with him through the dark hours. The horizon stretched endless, a promise and a prison both. This land had been Brennan land for 23 years, bought with blood and sweat when his father Marcus first drove cattle up from Texas. Now it sprawled across 8,000 acres of good grass and water rights that neighboring ranches would kill for. Thomas's mare shifted beneath him, eager for the barn and her morning oats. He patted her neck, feeling the warmth beneath his calloused palm. Easy, Belle. Let's check the water first. Down by the creek, the level ran lower than it should for September. Another dry year would mean buying feed, and buying feed meant dealing with the banks in Cheyenne. Banks meant men in clean suits who'd never birthed a calf at midnight or ridden fence in a blizzard. Men who held paper that could take away everything a man built with his hands. The sound of a hammer on iron rang out from the ranch compound below. Jake, the old foreman, already working on the broken wagon wheel. The ranch was stirring to life smoke from the cookhouse chimney, dogs stretching in the dirt, the everyday rhythm that Thomas knew better than his own heartbeat. But something was different this morning. His father's black stallion stood saddled by the main house, and Marcus never rode out this early unless there was trouble. Thomas guided Belle down the slope, past the bunkhouse where the hired men were pulling on their boots, past the smokehouse with its strips of venison hanging dark and fragrant. At the horse barn, he caught a glimpse of movement, a slight figure in worn cotton, moving between the stalls with practiced quiet. Clara, the orphan girl who'd shown up 3 years back, half-starved and looking for work. Marcus had nearly sent her packing until she'd gentled his prize stallion that 4 men couldn't handle. Now she lived in the small room above the tack shed, earning her keep with the horses. Thomas dismounted, leading Belle toward her stall. Clara looked up from where she knelt beside the bay mare, her hands working liniment into a swollen fetlock. Her dark hair fell loose from its pins, and there was a smudge of dirt across her cheek. When their eyes met, something passed between them quick as lightning, gone before it could be named. "Morning, Miss Clara."
Mr. Thomas."
She turned back to the mare, her voice steady as always, but he noticed how her fingers trembled slightly as she worked the liniment deeper. "How's she doing?" "Better. The swelling's down. Another day or 2 of rest should see her right." Thomas wanted to say more, wanted to step closer, wanted things he had no business wanting. Instead, he unsaddled Belle in silence, aware of every movement Clara made, every soft word she murmured to the injured mare. "Thomas," his father's voice cracked like a whip across the barn. Marcus Brennan stood in the doorway, his gray beard neat despite the early hour, his presence filling the space like smoke. "My study. Now." Clara kept her eyes on her work, but Thomas saw her shoulders tense. Marcus's gaze swept over her once, cold and dismissive. "Girl, see that the stallion's ready by noon. We'll have visitors." "Yes, Mr. Brennan." Thomas followed his father across the yard, his boots raising small puffs of dust. The main house loomed before them, 2 stories of timber and stone that proclaimed success to anyone who cared to look. Inside, the study smelled of leather and tobacco, the walls lined with ledgers that tracked every head of cattle, every bushel of grain, every dollar owed and earned. Marcus poured 2 glasses of whiskey despite the early hour. "Sit." Thomas remained standing. "What's this about?" His father's laugh held no warmth. "The future, your future, this ranch's future." He moved to the window, looking out at the land that rolled toward the mountains. "Times are changing. Boy, the open range is closing, railroads coming through, bringing Eastern money and Eastern laws. A man needs connections now, political connections, financial connections. We're doing fine. Fine isn't enough anymore. Marcus turned, his eyes hard as flint. The Petersons control the new bank. The Wheelers have the railroad contracts. Judge Morrison's daughter would bring us water rights to the entire North Valley. The Carters run the biggest mercantile in 3 counties. And Senator Walsh's girl. What are you saying? Marcus set down his glass with deliberate precision. You have 1 week to choose a wife from among these 5 families. I've already sent word. They'll be arriving throughout the week for you to make your selection. The words hung in the air like dust after a stampede. Thomas felt his jaw tighten. You can't be serious. Dead serious. You're 28. Thomas, past time you took a wife and gave this ranch an heir. Might as well be a wife who brings something useful to the table besides a pretty face. And if I refuse? His father's smile was thin as wire. Then I'll choose for you. The papers are already drawn up. You'll inherit nothing until you marry according to our needs. Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping. And stay away from that stable girl. She's hired help, nothing more. I see how you look at her. Thomas's hands clenched into fists. Clara's an orphan without a penny or a name worth knowing. She works for her bread, and that's all she'll ever be. You want to bed her? That's your business. But don't confuse lust with anything lasting. The help stays the help. The words hit like a physical blow. Thomas wanted to argue, wanted to tell his father about the way Clara could read a horse's pain in its eyes, the way she hummed while she worked, the way her rare smiles felt like sunrise. But Marcus had already turned back to his ledgers. The conversation finished in his mind. Thomas left the study with measured steps, though everything in him wanted to run. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning off the dew, heating the earth toward another scorching day. At the horse barn, Clara was leading the bay mare in slow circles, testing the injured leg. She didn't look at him, but he knew she'd heard. News traveled fast on a ranch, and Marcus's voice had carried. Thomas watched her work, memorizing the determined set of her shoulders, the gentle patience in her movements. A week, he said quietly. Clara's step faltered for just a moment. Yes, sir. I heard there'd be visitors. Clara. The mare needs walking. Her voice was steady as granite. And you have preparations to make, I expect. She led the horse away, her back straight despite the worn cotton dress, despite the dust in her hair, despite everything that said she didn't belong in the world Marcus Brennan was building. Thomas stood in the empty barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horse and heartbreak, knowing that 1 week would change everything. The sound of hammering resumed from the yard. Somewhere a calf bawled for its mother. The ranch moved on with its endless rhythm of work and survival. But Thomas felt the ground shifting beneath his feet like sand before a storm. He thought of his mother, dead these 15 years, who'd married for love and spent her life fighting the loneliness of the frontier. He thought of the 5 families converging on the ranch like vultures to good meat. He thought of Clara's hands, sure and gentle on the mare's injured leg. 1 week, 7 days to choose between duty and something that didn't yet have a name, something that lived in stolen glances and carefully maintained distances, something that might be worth more than all the water rights and railroad contracts in Wyoming. The sun climbed higher, promising another day of merciless heat. Thomas headed for the range, where the simple problems of cattle and grass waited. Behind him, he could hear Clara's voice, soft and musical, singing to the horses in the barn. The sound followed him like a ghost, like a promise, like everything he stood to lose. The chandelier cast dancing shadows across the dining room walls, its crystals catching light from 24 candles. Thomas tugged at his collar, the starched fabric foreign against his sun-weathered neck. The smell of lavender soap and pomade overwhelmed the familiar scents of leather and wood smoke, making the ranch house feel like someone else's home. They'd arrived throughout the day like a slow-moving storm. First the Petersons in their polished carriage, Banker Peterson's stomach straining against his silk vest. His daughter Margaret, pretty as a china doll and just as fragile-looking. Then the Wheelers, bringing talk of railroad expansion, and their daughter Elizabeth, who spoke in carefully measured sentences about profit margins. Judge Morrison's girl, Catherine, arrived on horseback at least, though her riding habit cost more than most cowboys saw in a year. Now they filled the dining room with bright conversation about cattle prices and the latest fashions from Denver. Thomas's father presided over it all like a king at court, pouring wine and directing talk toward advantageous connections. "The Patterson Ranch lost 200 head last month," banker Peterson said, cutting into his beef with precise movements. "Couldn't make their loan payment. The bank had to foreclose." "Unfortunate," Marcus replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But that's what comes of poor management. Their water rights will be up for auction next month, I hear." Thomas watched Clara move along the wall, refilling water glasses with careful hands. She'd been pulled from the stables for the evening, squeezed into a borrowed serving dress that didn't quite fit. When she reached for his glass, her hand trembled slightly, sending water splashing onto the white tablecloth. "Good heavens, girl, Mrs." Wheeler gasped. "Mind what you're doing?" Clara's face flushed deep red. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll—" "Leave it," Thomas said quietly. "It's just water." His father's eyes flashed a warning, but Thomas was already standing. "If you'll excuse me, I need to check on a sick mare. Jake's been watching her, but—" He let the excuse trail off, already moving toward the door. The night air hit him like a blessing, cool and clean. He could hear laughter from the bunkhouse where the hands were playing cards, untouched by the peculiar theater playing out in the main house. His feet carried him to the stables without conscious thought. The horses stirred softly in their stalls. By lamplight. He found Belle and ran his hands along her neck, finding comfort in her solid warmth. The barn door creaked, and he didn't need to turn to know who it was. Clara's presence changed the very quality of the air. "You shouldn't have left," she said softly. "Your father will be angry." "Let him be." She moved closer, and he could see she'd already changed back into her work clothes. "That world in there, that's where you belong?" "Is it?" Thomas turned to face her. In the lamplight, her eyes were dark as deep water. "I can't breathe in there. Clara, all those words that don't mean what they say. All those smiles that calculate profit and loss. But that's the world that keeps this ranch running." She reached past him to stroke Belle's nose. "The Petersons' bank, the Wheelers' railroad connections." "You sound like my father." "Maybe he's right." The words came out fierce, surprising them both. "Maybe you need someone who understands that world. Someone like who Margaret Peterson, who screamed when she saw a spider, Elizabeth Wheeler, who asked if we could simply hire more men when I mentioned the drought." Despite everything, Clara's mouth twitched toward a smile. "Catherine Morrison seems practical enough." "Catherine Morrison thinks horses are just transportation." He moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in Clara's brown eyes. "She doesn't understand that each one has its own spirit, its own way of seeing the world. She doesn't know that the bay mare favors her left side because she was caught in wire as a yearling. She doesn't—" "Stop!" Clara's voice broke. "Please stop." "Why?" "Because this is already hard enough." She turned away, but not before he saw the shine of tears. "Tomorrow Sarah Walsh arrives. I've heard about her. She rides. She shoots. She actually knows ranching. She'd be perfect for—" Thomas caught her arm gently, turning her back to face him. "Clara!" The barn door slammed open. Marcus stood silhouetted against the night, his voice cold as winter wind. "Thomas, inside, now!" Clara pulled free and stepped back, dropping her eyes. "I should check the stallion's hooves. Mr. Brennan, for tomorrow." Marcus ignored her completely. "Thomas, I won't ask again." The walk back to the house felt like a funeral march. Inside, the dining room had been cleared. The guests gathered in the parlor for coffee and conversation. Marcus steered Thomas to his study instead. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Checking on the horses. Marcus's hand slammed on the desk. Don't insult my intelligence, boy. You think I don't see what's happening? That girl's got her hooks in you, and you're fool enough to let her.
It's not like that.
No, then what is it, love? The word dripped with contempt. You think love keeps a ranch running? Love doesn't buy feed in a drought year. Love doesn't keep the banks from foreclosing. Love doesn't mean a damn thing when you're watching everything you built get sold at auction.
A mother loved you.
Your mother came from a good family with good connections. The love came later, if at all. Marcus moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. You think I don't know what it costs, choosing survival over sentiment. But that's what men do. Thomas, we make the hard choices. Before Thomas could respond, a knock came at the door. Elizabeth Wheeler entered, her pale blue dress rustling like paper. Forgive the interruption, Mr. Brennan. Thomas, I wondered if we might speak privately. Marcus excused himself with a meaningful look at his son. Elizabeth waited until his footsteps faded before speaking. I'll be direct, Mr. Brennan Thomas. I know you don't wish to marry me, and frankly, I have no particular desire to marry you. Thomas blinked, caught off guard. Then why? Because we could both benefit from a practical arrangement. She moved to the window, her profile sharp and calculating. I need a respectable marriage to inherit my grandfather's trust. You need connections to keep this ranch viable. We could maintain separate lives, discreet and civil. You could keep your interests in the stable. As long as you're discreet, many marriages work this way. You're suggesting a business arrangement. I'm suggesting survival. Mr. Brennan, the romantic notions of our generation are luxuries neither of us can afford. She turned to face him fully. Think about it. I'm not asking for love or even affection, just partnership. After she left, Thomas stood alone in the study, surrounded by ledgers and maps and the weight of inheritance. Through the window, he could see lamplight in the stable. Clara would be working late, preparing for tomorrow's demonstrations. Her hands gentle and sure in work she understood better than any banker's daughter ever could. He thought of Elizabeth's offer practical, sensible, empty as winter wind. He thought of his father's words about hard choices. He thought of the Patterson Ranch, sold at auction, the family scattered to the winds. Tomorrow, Sarah Walsh would arrive, the last of the candidates. His father had saved her for last deliberately the strongest option, the one who might actually tempt him away from what his heart wanted. Thomas knew he was running out of time, out of options, out of easy answers. The big house settled around him with small creaks and sighs, full of strangers planning his future. Outside, the night stretched endless over land that demanded everything a man had to give and sometimes more. Somewhere between duty and desire, between the house and the stable, between his father's world and Clara's, lay a choice that would define not just his future, but the very meaning of home. The lamp in the stable finally went dark. Thomas remained at the window, watching shadows move across the yard, feeling the weight of morning approaching like thunder on the horizon. The wind came up wrong that morning, dry and gritty from the south, carrying the taste of trouble. Thomas had been in the saddle since before dawn, checking the outer pastures where the yearlings grazed. The grass crackled beneath his mare's hooves, brittle as old paper. Jake rode up beside him, his weathered face creased with worry. Don't like this wind, boss. Reminds me of '78 when that fire took the Hendricks place. Thomas scanned the horizon, noting the way the cattle bunched together. Restless. Move them closer to the creek and post extra watches tonight. A dust cloud appeared on the eastern ridge riders coming fast. Thomas's hand went to his rifle before recognizing Will, one of the younger hands, pushing his horse hard. Mr. Thomas, your father wants you back quick. We got trouble. The ride back revealed the disaster. The main gate stood open, its heavy chain cut clean through. In the holding pasture where they'd gathered 50 head for market, only churned earth remained. The cattle were gone. Marcus stood by the ruined gate, his face dark as storm clouds. The house guests clustered on the porch, their fancy clothes incongruous against the raw reality of theft. Happened during that damn dinner party. Marcus spat. While we were playing society, they helped themselves to prime beef. Sarah Walsh had arrived that morning, and now she swung up onto her paint horse with practiced ease. Unlike the other women in their delicate dresses, she wore split skirts and carried a revolver on her hip.
Which way did they go?
Jake pointed northeast, toward Skeleton Ridge. Looks like maybe 6 riders, moving the cattle hard. They'll have to slow down at Devil's Canyon, Sarah said. If we ride now. We ride, Thomas confirmed, already calling out names. Jake, Will, Samuel, Hank, Miss Walsh, you should stay. Like hell, her eyes flashed.
Those bastards picked the wrong day to steal cattle.
Clara emerged from the barn leading 6 horses, already saddled. She'd anticipated the need, working while others talked. Her eyes met Thomas's briefly before she handed him the reins to his fastest mount.
I should go too,
Clara said quietly.
Somebody needs to tend injuries if...
No, Marcus's voice cut sharp. You stay and mind your place, girl. But Thomas was already pulling Clara up behind him on the horse.
We need every hand. She comes.
They rode hard toward the ridge, dust and wind burning their eyes. The cattle trail was easy to follow. 50 had left marks even a child could read. Sarah rode beside Thomas, handling her horse with skill that would have impressed him any other day. At Devil's Canyon, they found them. 6 men pushing exhausted cattle through the narrow passage, too focused on their prize to watch their backs properly. Thomas recognized 2 of them Brady boys from the failed ranch 2 valleys over, turned rustler when honest work dried up.
On my signal,
Thomas whispered, then louder.
That's far enough, boys.
The rustlers spun, reaching for guns. Everything happened fast, the crack of rifles, the bellow of frightened cattle, dust and noise and chaos. Clara slid off the horse and ran low toward the rocks, finding cover. Sarah's revolver barked twice, precise as a surgeon. One rustler's horse went down. Pinning its rider, another bullet whistled past Thomas's ear. The cattle, already spooked, began to scatter. If they stampeded in the narrow canyon. Clara darted from cover, waving her arms and shouting, turning the led steer back from the canyon edge. The mass of animals wheeled, confused, milling instead of running. Jake and Will used the distraction to flank the rustlers. Throw down your guns, Thomas shouted. It's over. 4 of the rustlers surrendered, but the 2 Brady boys made a break for the rocks. Sarah's horse leaped forward, cutting off their escape. When the younger Brady raised his rifle toward her, Thomas didn't think he fired. The boy spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. In the sudden silence, only the cattle's heavy breathing and the wind could be heard. Clara was already moving toward the wounded boy, tearing strips from her petticoat for bandages.
He'll live,
she announced after examining the wound.
But he needs a doctor.
They herded rustlers and cattle back toward the ranch as the sun peeked overhead. Sarah rode beside Thomas, her face flushed with exertion and something else satisfaction. Maybe, or approval.
You shoot well for a rancher's son. She said,
You ride well for a senator's daughter. She laughed, a sound like water in the desert. My father would die of apoplexy if he knew. He thinks I'm here to pour tea and simper. Her expression grew serious.
This is real, what you have here, this work, this land. It's worth fighting for.
Behind them, Clara helped the wounded rustler stay in his saddle, her hands steady and competent. Thomas watched her in quick glances, noting the tear in her dress, the dirt on her face, the quiet strength in how she managed both horse and injured man. Back at the ranch, chaos greeted them. Sheriff Watson had arrived, drawn by reports of the theft. The society guests stood in clusters, whispering about the violence they'd witnessed from afar. Margaret Peterson had fainted, apparently. at the sight of the returning riders covered in dust and blood. Marcus supervised the rustlers' transfer to the sheriff's custody, his satisfaction evident. "Good work," he told Thomas, loud enough for the guests to hear. "This is what it takes to hold land out here. Strength, decisiveness." His eyes moved deliberately to Sarah. "And choosing the right partners." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of statements to the sheriff, tending wounds, and settling the recovered cattle. Elizabeth Wheeler and her family departed early, citing urgent business. The Petersons followed soon after, Margaret still pale and shaking. Judge Morrison stayed to discuss legal proceedings against the rustlers, while Catherine packed quietly upstairs. As evening approached, Thomas found himself on the porch with Sarah. She'd changed into a clean dress but still wore her boots, a compromise between worlds. "Your father expects you to choose me," she said without preamble. "You're everything he wants: connections, competence, courage. But not what you want." It wasn't a question. She followed his gaze to the barn, where Clara worked alone, rubbing down the tired horses. "She was impressive today. Not many would have thought to turn the cattle like that." "Sarah, I'm not offended. Thomas," she stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "I came here thinking I might find a partnership, and I could be happy here. I think this life suits me better than Washington salons." She paused. "But I won't be someone's second choice, no matter how practical the match." That night, dinner was subdued. Only the Morrisons and Sarah remained. The conversation stilted and formal. Clara didn't appear. Marcus had banished her back to the stable after her presumption in joining the chase. After the guests retired, Thomas found his father in the study, brandy in hand. "Sarah Walsh would make you a formidable wife," Marcus said without looking up. "She proved that today." "She did." "The others are weak, useless, but she has steel in her spine, with her father's connections and her competence." "Father, the choice is obvious. Thomas, even you must see that." Marcus finally looked up, his eyes hard. 3 days left. Choose Sarah, or I choose for you." Thomas left without answering, his feet carrying him to the one place that felt real anymore. The barn was dark, except for a single lantern. Clara sat on a hay bale, treating a cut on her arm he hadn't noticed before. "Let me," he said, taking the cloth from her hands. She held still while he cleaned the wound, her breathing shallow. "Sarah Walsh is magnificent," she said quietly. "She saved that man's life today with her shooting, and the way she rode. Clara, she's perfect for you. For this place, she understands both worlds, can fight when needed, can—" Thomas silenced her with a kiss, sudden and desperate and tasting of dust and dreams. For a moment, she responded, her hands reaching for his shoulders. Then she pulled back, tears streaming down her face. "We can't. You know we can't. I know nothing except that you're the only thing that makes sense anymore." She stood, backing away. "I'm nobody. Thomas, I own nothing but the clothes on my back and what little I've saved from my wages. I can't give you alliances or water rights or political connections. All I have is everything I want." The words hung between them like a bridge over impossible terrain. Outside, wind rattled the barn doors, and somewhere a coyote howled, the real world with its demands and dangers pressed in from all sides. But here in the lamplight, only truth remained.
3 days,
Clara whispered.
What can change in 3 days?
Thomas didn't answer. He couldn't tell her about the hope taking shape in his mind, fragile as frost and just as likely to melt under scrutiny. But as he watched her disappear into the darkness toward her quarters, he knew that 3 days would have to be enough. They had to be. The ledgers told a story written in red ink. Thomas spread them across his father's desk in the pre-dawn quiet, when the house still slept and even the roosters hadn't yet stirred. 3 months of feed reserves, assuming normal rainfall. The banknote coming due in October, water rights that would expire if not renewed with the Territorial Commission. But there in the survey from 2 years back lay possibility. The eastern section. 800 acres of scrub and rock that Marcus had written off as worthless. Except the new railway line would pass within 2 miles of it, and railway companies needed depot sites, water stations, telegraph posts. Thomas pulled out the territorial map, tracing routes with his finger. If the Denver and Western Railway took the Southern Pass as rumored, that worthless land would become prime real estate. A lease agreement, maybe an outright sale of a portion, could bring enough cash to secure the ranch for years. A burning oil late. Jake stood in the doorway, coffee in hand. The old foreman moved with the careful steps of a man whose bones predicted weather better than any almanac. Early, Thomas corrected. Jake, you remember that surveyor who came through last year, Hammond?
Slick fellow from Denver. Kept asking about water sources and grades.
He was mapping for the railway. I'm sure of it. Thomas showed him the calculations. If we could lease them the eastern section. Jake whistled low. Your father know about this? Not yet. I need to be sure first. Thomas rolled up the maps. Can you ride to Cheyenne today? Quietly find out what Hammond's survey recommended. Check the land office for any recent claims near our eastern boundary. That's a day's hard ride each way. I know, but I need information before... Thomas stopped. Before the week ended. Before he was forced to choose a bride like cattle at auction. Jake studied him with eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. This about more than railway money, ain't it? Thomas didn't answer directly. Take Sam with you. He knows how to ask questions without raising suspicion. After Jake left, Thomas walked the ranch in the growing light. The drought had hit everyone hard this year. The creek ran at half its normal level, and the grass in the upper pastures had gone brown despite the season. Without the bank's cooperation or a significant cash infusion, they'd be selling off land or cattle by spring. Maybe both. Near the corrals, he found Sarah Walsh already up, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. She'd stayed on despite the other families leaving, claiming she wanted to see how the story ended. You're planning something, she said without preamble. What makes you say that?
The way you're looking at this place, like a man saying goodbye or hello, I can't tell which. She pulled her shawl tighter. My father does the same thing before a political gamble.
They stood in comfortable silence, watching the ranch wake up. Cowboys emerged from the bunkhouse, stretching and grumbling. The cook banged his triangle, calling folks to breakfast. And there, moving between the horses with her usual grace, was Clara.
She loves this place,
Sarah observed.
Not for what it represents or what it's worth. She loves it for itself.
Yes, that's rare. Sarah turned to face him.
I'm leaving today. Thomas, this isn't my fight, and we both know you've already chosen, even if you haven't admitted it.
Sarah, listen. Her voice carried the authority of someone used to being heard. Your father's not wrong about needing connections, but he's forgotten that the strongest connections aren't always the obvious ones. That girl knows every horse trader and small rancher in 3 counties. They trust her because she's one of them. That's worth something too. Before Thomas could respond, a commotion arose from the main house. Marcus's voice boomed across the yard, summoning him. In the study, his father held a letter, his face dark with anger. The Petersons are calling in our loan. 30 days to pay in full, or they can force a sale. Thomas kept his face neutral despite his racing heart.
They can't do that unless we've missed payments.
We haven't, but there's a clause about maintaining proper business relationships. Apparently, your behavior at dinner constituted a breach. Marcus slammed the letter down.
This is what comes of insulting important people.
Boy, I didn't insult anyone. I left a check on...
I know exactly what you left a check on.
His father's voice dropped dangerous low.
That girl's going... today. I won't have her causing more trouble. She didn't cause anything. If anyone's to blame, she's a distraction you can't afford. Neither can this ranch. Marcus moved to the window. The Morrisons are still interested. Despite everything, Catherine's dowry could cover the Peterson loan. You'll propose today. No. The word hung between them like a challenge. Marcus turned slowly. What did you say? I said no. I won't propose to Catherine Morrison or anyone else you choose. Then you're choosing to lose everything. This ranch, your inheritance, your future. Maybe, or maybe I'm choosing to find another way. Marcus laughed, bitter as alkali water. Another way? You think you're the first to believe you're smarter than the system? I've seen dozens of ranchers try to go it alone. You know where they are, now buried or broke. A knock interrupted them. Clara stood in the doorway, her face pale but determined. Mr. Brennan, there's someone here from the land office. Says it's urgent. The man who entered looked like every other government official thin suit. Thin mustache, thin patience. But his message made Thomas's heart race. Mr. Thomas Brennan, I'm Timothy Forbes from the Territorial Land Commission. We've received an offer for your eastern acreage. The Denver and Western Railway wants to discuss terms. Marcus's expression shifted from anger to confusion. What offer? I haven't authorized. I sent an inquiry last week, Thomas said quietly, just to test interest. Forbes opened his portfolio. They're prepared to offer $15,000 for a 100-acre purchase, plus annual lease payments for water and passage rights. They need an answer within 48 hours. The room went silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock. $15,000 would cover the Peterson loan and leave enough for feed through winter. The lease payments would provide steady income independent of cattle prices. Marcus sank into his chair, looking suddenly old. You did this behind my back. I did what needed doing. And if they'd said no if Jake comes back empty-handed, then I'd have tried something else. Thomas met his father's eyes. This ranch is my life too. I won't let it fail. But I won't sell my soul to save it either. Forbes cleared his throat. There is one condition. The railway wants assurance of stable management. They've heard about local difficulties. They need to know the ranch will remain operational. It will, Thomas said firmly. After Forbes left, Marcus stared at the offer for a long time. This doesn't solve everything. We still need working relationships with the banks, the merchants. We need the ranch to survive first. The rest we can build. With what good intentions? With work. With adapting to what's coming instead of clinging to what was. Thomas moved toward the door. The world's changing. Father, the open range is ending. Yes, but that doesn't mean we have to end with it. Outside, he found Clara by the water trough, her hands shaking as she pretended to check the pump. I heard, she whispered. The whole ranch is talking. $15,000. It's just money. She laughed, short and sharp. Just money. Only someone who's never been without could say that. You're right. He moved closer. I don't know what it's like to have nothing, but I'm learning what it's like to have everything that doesn't matter. Thomas, the deal isn't done yet. Jake might come back with bad news. The railway might withdraw. A dozen things could go wrong. But they might not. No, he agreed. They might not. That evening, as the sun painted the sky crimson, Jake and Sam returned. The news they brought changed everything. Hammond's survey had indeed recommended the southern pass. More than that, there were plans for a major depot within 5 miles of the ranch. The eastern section would be worth triple what the railway offered within 2 years. But that's not all, Jake said, producing another document. The water rights you were worried about, turns out whoever holds the eastern section also controls the underground spring that feeds Merchant Creek. That water's worth more than gold out here. Thomas felt the ground shift beneath him, not the sickening lurch of disaster, but the solid settling of foundation stones. They had leverage now, options, a future that didn't require selling his heart for security.
But even as hope bloomed in his chest, he knew the hardest battle still lay ahead. His father's pride, the community's expectations, and Clara herself, who'd spent so long believing she deserved nothing that she might refuse everything. The stars were coming out, bright and cold in the clear air. Somewhere a nighthawk called. The ranch settled into its evening rhythm, unaware that its future had just pivoted on the axis of stubborn love and calculated risk. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time in a week, Thomas felt like he could breathe. The parlor glowed with lamplight and barely contained tension. Marcus had insisted on one final gathering, a farewell dinner for the remaining guests, though everyone knew it was meant to be more. Catherine Morrison sat at the piano, her fingers moving mechanically through a waltz. Judge Morrison discussed water law with Marcus by the fireplace. Sarah Walsh had departed that morning as promised, leaving only the Morrisons to witness whatever drama would unfold. Thomas stood by the window, watching lightning flash on the horizon. A storm building, but still far off. Like everything else these days, trouble visible but not yet arrived. "You've been distracted all evening," Catherine said, abandoning the piano to join him. "Father says you've had an interesting offer from the railway. News travels fast. It always does when money's involved." She studied his reflection in the glass. "It won't be enough. 15,000 handles the immediate crisis. But what about next year, the year after?" "We'll manage." "With what hope?" Her laugh was bitter. "I've watched my father manage for years. Each crisis slightly worse, each solution slightly more desperate. Until finally you're not managing anymore, you're just surviving." Before Thomas could respond, Clara entered carrying a tray of coffee. She'd been pressed into service again. Marcus's way of reminding everyone of her place. Her hands were steady now, professional, distant. She didn't meet anyone's eyes. "Girl," Judge Morrison called out. "More brandy." "Yes, sir." As she passed, Catherine deliberately extended her foot. Clara stumbled, the tray tilting dangerously. Coffee splashed across the Persian rug, the cups shattering on the hardwood floor. "How clumsy," Catherine exclaimed. "Really, Mr. Brennan, your help needs better training." Clara knelt to collect the broken pieces, her face burning. Thomas moved to help, but his father's iron grip stopped him. "Leave it," Marcus commanded. "She made the mess. She'll clean it." It wasn't her fault. "Everything that happens in this house is someone's fault," Marcus said loudly. "And everyone must learn their proper place. Isn't that right, Miss Morrison?" Catherine smiled, triumphant. "Absolutely. Standards must be maintained." Clara continued gathering shards of china, a drop of blood appearing where one had cut her palm. The room watched in silence Judge Morrison with mild interest, Marcus with cold satisfaction, Catherine with cruel pleasure. "Enough!" Thomas's voice cut through the tension. He knelt beside Clara, taking the broken pieces from her hands. "You're hurt. Go tend to it." "Thomas," Marcus warned. "No." Thomas stood, helping Clara to her feet. "I said enough." "You forget yourself, boy." "No, Father, I finally remember myself." He turned to face the room. "Judge Morrison, Catherine, I apologize for wasting your time. I won't be proposing marriage to anyone chosen for their connections or dowry." Catherine's face flushed red. "You're refusing me for her, a nobody who mucks out stalls?" "I'm refusing a life built on cruelty and calculation." Thomas moved toward the door, Clara's blood still on his hands. "If you'll excuse me." The storm broke as he reached the barn. Rain hammered the roof, turning dust to mud in seconds. Clara stood at the medicine shelf, trying to bandage her hand one-handed. Without speaking, Thomas took over, cleaning the cut with whiskey that made her hiss. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "Stood up for you." "Thrown away your future." Tears mixed with rainwater on her face. "Catherine's right. I'm nobody. I have nothing to offer." You have everything. He finished tying the bandage. Kindness, competence, the respect of every small rancher and horse trader in the territory. You have hands that gentle wild horses and eyes that see truth even when it hurts. That's not enough. Not for this world. Then maybe it's time to change the world. Thunder shook the barn. In the lamplight, Clara looked young and old, simultaneously worn by loss, but not broken by it. Your father will never accept this. He'll have to. The railway deal gives us breathing room. We don't need the Morrisons or anyone else. He touched her face gently. Clara, I'm done letting fear dictate our lives. Fear keeps people alive out here. No, caution keeps people alive. Fear just keeps them from living. She pulled away, moving to the barn door. Rain sheeted down, turning the yard into a shallow lake. In 2 days, your week is up. Your father will choose for you if you don't choose yourself. I have chosen. Thomas, I choose you. The words rang clear despite the storm. I choose the woman who works 18-hour days without complaint, who knows every horse's name and temperament, who saved our cattle from stampeding, who can't read. The confession tore from her throat. I can't read or write. Thomas, I can count money and track inventory in my head, but I can't read your ledgers or write your correspondence. What kind of rancher's wife can't even? Then I'll teach you. It's not that simple. Nothing about this is simple. He moved closer, rain misting through the open door. But I'd rather face complicated with you than simple with anyone else. Marcus's voice boomed from the house, barely audible over the storm, calling Thomas back, demanding obedience. Go, Clara said. Face him, but not for me, for you. The house felt suffocating after the clean violence of the storm. The Morrisons had retired, but Marcus waited in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched on his desk. You've embarrassed this family, insulted our guests, thrown away alliances we desperately need. I've chosen my own path. Your path, Marcus laughed bitterly. You think that railway money solves everything? You think you can run this ranch on love and good intentions? I think I can run it on hard work and adaptation, the same way you built it. I built it on sacrifice, on choosing survival over sentiment. And look where that's led. Thomas spread his hands. You're so focused on surviving. You've forgotten what we're surviving for. This ranch isn't just land and cattle. It's home, family, community. Pretty words won't keep the bank from foreclosing. No, but the railway deal will. And after that, we adapt. Clara knows every small rancher in 3 counties. They trust her. We could organize cooperative drives, share resources, build something stronger than individual desperate stands against change. Marcus stared at him for a long moment. You're serious about this? About her? Dead serious. Then you're a fool. His father turned to the window where rain still pounded. But maybe the world needs more fools. God knows the smart men haven't made it much better. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a crack in the wall. A possibility of something beyond rigid tradition and calculated alliances. Thomas left the study to find Clara still in the barn, sitting on a hay bale, watching the storm. He sat beside her, not touching, just present. I won't be easy to love, she said quietly. I have too much pride and too little polish. I'll embarrass you at social functions. I'll say the wrong things to the wrong people. Good. Someone needs to. Despite everything, she smiled. You're impossible. I'm possible. We're possible, if we're brave enough. The storm was passing, the thunder growing distant. Tomorrow would bring new battles with his father, with society, with their own fears. But tonight, sitting in a barn that smelled of hay and horses and rain, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real, solid, practical hope. Not the fairy tale kind that ignored reality, but the working kind that looked at problems square and said, we'll figure it out. Clara leaned against his shoulder,
Just slightly. Just enough. Outside, the rain gentled to a whisper. The ranch settled into quiet, waiting for dawn and whatever came next.
2 days remained. 2 days to convince his father, secure the railway deal, and prove that sometimes the greatest risk was not taking one at all. The grandfather clock struck 3 in the afternoon. Marcus had summoned everyone to the main parlor, the remaining ranch families who'd stayed to witness the spectacle. Judge Morrison and Catherine still nursing their wounded pride. The banker Peterson, who'd returned upon hearing about the railway deal. And various townspeople who'd somehow gotten word that today, Thomas Brennan would announce his choice. Jake had returned at dawn with the signed railway contract. Better terms than initially offered $20,000 for the 100 acres. Plus water and passage rights that would bring in $2,000 annually. The papers lay on Marcus's desk like a royal flush in a high-stakes game. Thomas stood before the assembled crowd, feeling their expectations press against him like a physical weight. His father sat in his leather chair, face unreadable as stone. Catherine Morrison perched on the settee, her smile sharp as glass, still believing she held the winning hand. "Thank you all for coming," Thomas began. "This week, my father asked me to choose a wife from among several excellent families, each offering broad advantages, financial, political, social, that would benefit this ranch." Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. Peterson nodded sagely. Judge Morrison leaned forward with interest. "However," Thomas continued, "I've learned something this week. A ranch, like a life, can't be built on advantages alone. It needs a foundation of truth." Marcus's jaw tightened. Catherine's smile flickered. "The truth is, this ranch faces challenges. Drought, debt, a changing world that doesn't favor the old ways." Thomas pulled out the railway contract. "This morning, we secured a deal that ensures our immediate survival. $20,000, plus ongoing revenue from the Denver and Western Railway." Gasps echoed through the room. Peterson's face went pale. The ranch wouldn't need his bank's money after all. "But survival isn't living," Thomas said. "And a marriage built on calculation isn't a marriage, it's a business merger." "Get to the point, boy," Marcus growled. "The point, father, is that I choose none of the candidates you selected." The room erupted. Catherine shot to her feet, her face flushed with rage. "This is outrageous. After everything, the time invested, the promises implied." "I made no promises. Miss Morrison, if any were implied, they came from assumptions, not from me." "Then you choose no one?" Peterson asked, already calculating how this might affect his bank's position. "I didn't say that." Thomas moved to the door. "Clara, would you come in, please?" She entered slowly, wearing her simple work dress, her bandaged hand hidden in the folds of her skirt. The room went silent as death. "This," Thomas said, "is who I choose." The explosion was immediate. Catherine laughed, harsh and disbelieving. "The stable girl. You're refusing me for a servant." "I'm choosing a partner who's proven her worth through action, not inheritance." Judge Morrison stood, his legal mind already working. "This is irregular. Thomas, there could be consequences." "Legal consequences." Thomas pulled out another document. "This is a certificate of intent to marry, properly witnessed and filed, everything legal and proper. Judge." "But not proper at all." Catherine's voice rose to near shriek. "She's nobody. She has nothing." "She has integrity," Thomas said quietly. "She has competence. She has the respect of every working person in this territory." Clara finally spoke, her voice steady despite the hostility radiating from the crowd. "Mr. Thomas is right about one thing. I am nobody special. I own 3 dresses and a pair of boots. I have 6 years of honest wages saved, and hands that know work. That's all." "That's everything," Thomas said. Marcus stood slowly, commanding the room's attention. Everyone waited for his verdict, his condemnation. "Miss Clara, he said formally.
Can you run a household?
I can learn, sir. Can you manage accounts? I can't read yet, Mr. Brennan, but I can count, calculate, and remember every figure told to me, and I will learn to read. Can you host a dinner party? Entertain the governor, negotiate with bankers?
Clara lifted her chin. No, sir, but I can birth a calf at midnight. I can gentle a horse everyone else has given up on. I can make $1 stretch to $2 and tell you which merchants are honest and which water their whiskey. I may not speak French, but I speak the language of every farmer and rancher who actually works this land. The room held its breath. Marcus walked to his desk, picked up the railway contract, studied it for a long moment. $20,000, he said finally. Plus $2,000 a year. That's what my son accomplished this week. Not through marriage negotiations, but through intelligence and initiative. He turned to face the room. Perhaps it's time to admit that the old ways aren't always the best ways. Perhaps survival requires adaptation. You're accepting this, Peterson sputtered. This misalliance. I'm accepting reality, Marcus said. The world is changing. The open range is ending. The future belongs to those who can adapt, not those who cling to yesterday's rules. He looked at Clara directly. You'll need training, education. The transition won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. Mr. Brennan. No, he agreed. It isn't. He signed the marriage certificate with decisive strokes. The wedding will be small, private. We'll not make a spectacle of it. Catherine gathered her skirts, her face twisted with fury. This is a mistake you'll regret, Thomas Brennan. When she embarrasses you, when she fails, when you realize what you've thrown away.
Then I'll deal with the consequences. Thomas said, my choices, my consequences. The Morrisons left in a cloud of indignation. Peterson followed, muttering about irregular procedures and social decay. Others drifted away, some shocked, some secretly pleased to see the high and mighty brought low. Finally, only family remained, if Clara could be called family now. Marcus poured 3 glasses of whiskey, handed 1 each to Thomas and Clara. To adaptation, he said, raising his glass.
And to consequences.
They drank in silence. The whiskey burned Clara's throat. She'd never had anything stronger than beer, but she didn't cough, didn't flinch. She'd faced worse burns than this. There will be talk, Marcus warned.
Some doors will close to us.
Others will open, Thomas countered.
The small ranchers, the farmers, the people who actually work, they'll work with us now.
Clara's one of them. It's a gamble. Everything is father. At least this gamble is honest. Marcus studied Clara for a long moment. My wife came from a good family. Proper education, proper connections. She was miserable here. The isolation broke her spirit long before the fever took her body. He paused. Maybe someone who chooses this life, rather than being born to it, will fare better. It was the closest to a blessing they'd get. Clara understood that, understood the grief and fear behind Marcus's rigid control.
I won't try to be your wife, Mr.
Brennan, she said carefully.
But I'll try to be a partner to your son and an asset to this ranch.
That's all anyone can ask. As evening fell, Thomas and Clara walked to the east pasture where the surveyors would soon break ground for the railway depot. The land that had seemed worthless now held their future.
Are you sure? Clara asked. You could still change your mind. Sarah Walsh might...
Sarah's gone back to Washington. She sent a telegram wishing us well.
She's a remarkable woman.
Yes, but she's not you. Thomas took her unbandaged hand. I need you to understand something. Clara, this isn't charity or rebellion or wild passion. This is choice. Deliberate, conscious choice. Why? Because when I'm with you, I remember why this land matters. Not for its value or status, but for itself, for the life it sustains, the work it demands, the truth it reveals. He squeezed her hand. You see this place the way it really is, not through the lens of profit and loss.
I see you the same way,
she admitted. Not the rancher's son or the heir or the catch, just Thomas, who reads ledgers by lamplight and worries about every sick calf and stands up for people who can't stand for themselves. The stars were coming out, bright in the clear sky. Tomorrow would bring challenges: Clara's education, the wedding preparations, the social fallout from Thomas's choice. But tonight, standing on land that would soon transform from liability to asset, with a woman who'd transformed from servant to partner. Thomas felt the rightness of it in his bones. "We'll make this work," Clara said, as if reading his thoughts. "Yes," he agreed. "We will." They stood together as darkness fell. Two figures against the vast Wyoming sky. Small but unbroken, facing a future they'd chosen rather than inherited. It wasn't a fairy tale. Ending fairy tales didn't include railway contracts and social ostracism and the hard work of building something real from something true. But it was their ending, their beginning, their choice. And that, Thomas thought as Clara leaned into his shoulder, was worth more than all the proper matches in the territory. 2 months had passed since the announcement, and Clara's hands bore new calluses not from rope and leather, but from gripping a pencil too tight as she traced letters in the lamplight. The school marm, Mrs. Henderson, came 3 evenings a week, patient but firm as Clara struggled through McGuffey's reader like a child.
"The cat sat on the—"
Clara paused, sounding out the next word.
"mat."
"Good," Mrs. Henderson said. "Now the whole sentence, smooth like—" Clara took a breath. The cat sat on the mat. Such simple words, but each one conquered felt like breaking a wild horse. After Mrs. Henderson left, Clara would practice until her eyes burned, copying letters, matching them to sounds, building words like laying fence posts one at a time, steady and sure. The household ledger still defeated her, but she'd learned to recognize numbers and could follow Thomas's finger as he explained each column. "Feed costs here, wages there. This shows what we owe, this what we're owed." Mrs. Garrett, the stern housekeeper, had been harder to win over than any ledger. The first week, she'd watched Clara's every move with hawk eyes, waiting for failure. But Clara knew work, even if she didn't know which fork went where. She attacked household management like ranch work, direct, efficient, without complaint. "You're holding that china like it's going to bite," Mrs. Garrett observed one morning. "It might as well, for what it cost," Clara replied, carefully setting down the delicate cup. The older woman's mouth twitched almost a smile. "At least you respect it. The last girl we had dropped 3 pieces her first day and laughed." Slowly, Clara earned her place. She learned to plan meals with Cookie, checking supplies and calculating portions. She discovered that running a house wasn't so different from running a stable. Everything needed its place, its time, its purpose. But the social calls were torture. The few brave enough to visit came armed with condescension disguised as charity. Mrs. Wheeler arrived one Tuesday, dripping false sympathy. "How wonderful that Thomas is teaching you to read, like a missionary project." Clara served tea with steady hands. "Yes, ma'am. Education's a gift I'm grateful for." "And you're managing adequately." "We're managing fine, thank you." Mrs. Wheeler's smile sharpened. "Of course, dear, though I heard there was some confusion at Henderson's store, something about not understanding the bill." Clara's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice level. "Mr. Henderson's writing is hard to read. Thomas sorted it out." After such visits, Clara would escape to the stables, where horses didn't care about her grammar and Jake didn't judge her mistakes. "Don't let them henpeckers get to you," Jake said one afternoon, finding her brushing Belle with unnecessary vigor. "They're just mad their daughters got passed over." "They're right, though I don't belong in their world. Maybe their world needs shaking up." The surprise came from unexpected quarters. Doc Summers and his wife called one evening, bringing a wedding quilt the church women had made. Every stitch is a prayer for happiness. Mrs. Summers said warmly, the Coleman women especially wanted you to have it. You helped save their horses from colic last winter. The pattern was simple log cabin blocks in blues and browns, but the gesture was profound. Working people remembered kindness. Even more surprising was Judge Morrison's visit. Alone, without his daughter. I came to apologize, he said simply. Catherine's behavior was unworthy. You didn't deserve that treatment. Clara studied him carefully. Why tell me this? Because I've watched you these past weeks. You work harder than anyone. Never complain, never put on airs. That's rare. He paused. And because Thomas made the right choice, even if it wasn't the easy one. The real test came when the horse traders arrived for the autumn sale. These were Clara's people, rough men who knew her from years of working the circuit. Would they still respect her? Or would her elevation make her suspect? Tom Baxter, a grizzled trader from Montana, squinted at her. That really you? Clara heard you married up. It's me, Tom. Still know a spavin from a splint. Prove it. She walked through his string, evaluating each horse with practiced eyes. The bay's favoring his left front stone bruise. Probably. The paint mare's in foal. Though you didn't mention it. And that black gelding's been drugged to hide a respiratory problem. His nostrils are too still. Baxter grinned. Still got the eye, even in fancy clothes. They're not that fancy, Clara said, though the cotton dress was the finest she'd ever owned. Word spread quickly. Clara Brennan knew horses, knew trading, knew the people who worked the land. Soon, smaller ranchers began coming to her for advice, trusting her judgment over bigger operations that had scorned them. Marcus watched it all with growing interest. One evening, he called her to his study first. Peterson's bank is offering loans at 12%, highway robbery. Yes, sir. Tom Baxter says you suggested the small ranchers pool resources for feed buying, get bulk prices. It seemed practical. Marcus leaned back. It is practical. It's also the kind of thinking we need. He pushed a ledger toward her. Can you read this? Clara studied it carefully, recognizing some words, puzzling out others from context. Cattle, counts, spring, calf, numbers. Close enough. By spring. I want you reading these completely, understanding them. This ranch needs more than one set of eyes on its books. It was acceptance, finally, not warm, but real. The transformation wasn't just Clara's. Thomas had changed too, growing into his authority, without the pressure of forced marriage. He'd found his own voice firm with the hands, strategic with buyers, confident in his choices. You're different, Clara told him one evening as they walked the property. How so? You stand taller, speak clearer. You're not fighting yourself anymore. I'm not fighting for approval anymore, he corrected. Yours is the only opinion that matters. That's not true, and you know it. Fine. Yours matters most. They'd established a pattern morning rides to check the herds, evening lessons in the parlor, stolen moments in between. It wasn't a fairy tale romance. It was partnership, building slowly on shared work and mutual respect. The letter from Sarah Walsh arrived on a Thursday, elegant script on expensive paper. Thomas and Clara, news travels even to Washington. I heard about your wedding plans and the railway success. I'm not surprised, Clara. You have something more valuable than breeding or beauty. You have authenticity. In a world of performances, that's revolutionary. I'm returning to Wyoming next month for my father's campaign. May I call on you? I'd like to see this new partnership in person. Also, Catherine Morrison is telling everyone you'll fail within a year. Prove her wrong. Sarah. Clara read it slowly, proudly 3 months ago. She couldn't have managed it. She wants to visit. Thomas said, she wants to be friends. Clara corrected. Real friends, not society acquaintances.
Can you handle that? Clara smiled. I can handle anything that's honest.
Mrs. Garrett interrupted, looking flustered. Mrs. Brennan, we have a problem. The governor's secretary just sent word the governor will stop here next week on his way to Cheyenne. He expects accommodation and a proper dinner.
Clara's stomach clenched. The governor. Politics and polish and everything she wasn't ready for.
We'll manage, she said, though her voice shook slightly. Mrs. Garrett studied her.
Yes, she said finally. I believe we will.
That night, Clara lay awake planning. She couldn't give the governor elegant conversation or sophisticated entertainment, but she could give him something real honest food, genuine hospitality, and a glimpse of what Wyoming really was beneath its rough surface. Nervous? Thomas asked in the darkness.
Terrified.
Good. Means it matters. She turned to face him.
What if I embarrass you?
Then we'll be embarrassed together. He pulled her close. Clara, I didn't choose you despite who you are. I chose you because of who you are. Trust that. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance. The sound that once meant danger now seemed like possibility. Wild things adapting, surviving, thriving in a changing world. Clara closed her eyes, letters and numbers dancing behind her lids. Tomorrow she'd practice reading recipes with Cookie, review table settings with Mrs. Garrett, work on her penmanship until her fingers cramped. She was building herself new, word by word, skill by skill, not trying to become someone else, but becoming more herself, the woman who could bridge two worlds because she belonged fully to neither and therefore could see both clearly. The governor's visit would be a test, but then everything out here was a test, and Clara had never failed one that mattered. The autumn morning arrived crisp and golden, with frost edging the grass like nature's own lace. The small chapel sat white against the brown hills, its bell tower catching the first light. Inside, fewer than 30 people gathered ranch hands in their cleanest clothes, a handful of townspeople who valued character over convention, and the few who'd stood by them through the scandal of their choice. Clara stood in the tiny back room, wearing her mother's wedding dress that Mrs. Summers had altered. It wasn't silk or satin, just good cotton with small pearl buttons that had survived years of prairie life before her mother died. Her hands trembled as she tried to pin the simple veil. Here, Sarah Walsh appeared in the doorway, having arrived that morning as promised.
Let me...
With practiced fingers, Sarah secured the veil, then stepped back to look.
You're beautiful. Not society beautiful, real beautiful. I'm terrified. Good. Thomas is too. I just saw him change his collar 3 times.
Through the thin wall, they could hear the congregation settling, boots scraping on wooden floors, quiet murmurs of conversation. No organ played, just old Sam with his fiddle, warming up with scales.
Clara.
Marcus stood in the doorway, stiff in his black suit.
It's time.
Sarah squeezed Clara's hand and slipped out to take her seat. Marcus offered his arm formally. They'd never discussed this, him giving her away, but here he was. Mr. Brennan, you don't have to...
Yes, I do.
His voice was gruff. You've got no father to do it, and like it or not, you're family now. They walked to the chapel door. Through the gap, Clara could see Thomas at the altar, Jake standing beside him as best man, both of them sun-weathered and serious in their Sunday clothes.
Clara,
Marcus said quietly, my wife came from society. She knew all the rules, all the dances, all the proper things to say. She was miserable every day of her life here. He paused. You come from nothing, and yet you're happier feeding chickens than she ever was hosting dinner parties. That tells me something.
What?
That my son might be smarter than I gave him credit for. Sam's fiddle began the wedding march, not quite right but earnest. Marcus led Clara down the aisle between the few rows of witnesses. She saw Cookie dabbing his eyes with his apron, Mrs. Garrett sitting properly but with a soft expression, Doc Summers and his wife smiling warmly. Tom Baxter and several horse traders sat in the back, having ridden 50 miles to see their Clara married. Thomas watched her approach, his eyes never leaving her face. When Marcus placed her hand in Thomas's, he squeezed it once a blessing without words, then took his seat. Reverend Mills kept the ceremony simple. No flowery speeches about society or proper places, just words about commitment, partnership, and building something together from honest ground. Do you, Thomas, take Clara to be your wife, to work beside, to build with, to face whatever comes? I do. Do you, Clara, take Thomas to be your husband, to stand with, to grow with, to make a life with regardless of ease or hardship? I do. Jake produced the ring's simple gold bands they'd ordered from the Sears catalog. Nothing fancy, but solid and true. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Thomas kissed her, brief and gentle, aware of the watching eyes, but his hand on her waist was steady, sure, permanent. They signed the register with Clara carefully writing her new name, Clara Brennan, in the penmanship she'd practiced for weeks. The letters were a bit shaky but readable, legal. The reception was in the ranch's main barn, cleared and decorated with autumn leaves and late wildflowers. No champagne or 7-course meal, just good beef. Cookie's best biscuits, apple pie, and Jake's hidden stash of good whiskey for toasting. The ranch hands had pooled money for a gift, a new saddle with CB tooled into the leather. So you can ride proper like Mrs. Brennan, Will said, blushing furiously. Tom Baxter and the traders gave her a young mare. Bloodlines traced back 3 generations. Wedding present from all of us who knew you when you was just Clara. She'll throw fine foals. Even Mrs. Wheeler appeared briefly, leaving a silver brush set with a card that said simply, "For new beginnings." It was either an apology or a strategy, Clara didn't care which. As afternoon wore into evening, Thomas and Clara slipped away to the east pasture. The railway construction had begun, crews laying track that would soon connect their land to the wider world. They sat on the fence, watching progress that promised prosperity. No honeymoon trip to Denver? Clara asked, half teasing. I thought we'd check the winter pastures instead. Make sure the water systems are ready. Thomas Brennan, you romantic fool! He laughed. Would you prefer Denver? No. She leaned against his shoulder. I'd prefer exactly this. They returned to find Marcus in his study, ledgers spread before him. He looked up as they entered. The Morrison Ranch is going up for sale. They overextended on some mining venture. Their water rights adjoin our north pasture. Thomas studied the maps. We could manage it with the railway money. We could, Clara interrupted, surprising both men. But should we, the Hendricks family, needs those water rights more? They've got good land, but no reliable water. If we bought it and leased them access, fair-like, we'd have grateful neighbors instead of struggling ones. Marcus stared at her. That's actually smart. Don't sound so surprised. That night, in their own room, not the master's suite, but the good corner room that caught morning sun, Clara sat at the small desk Thomas had moved in, practicing her letters. Thomas watched from the bed, still amazed this was real. You don't have to study on our wedding night. I want to. Tomorrow everything starts proper. I need to be ready. He rose and looked over her shoulder. She was copying a passage from the almanac about crop rotation. Her letters were becoming steadier, more confident. Clara Brennan, she wrote at the bottom. Then again, experimenting with flourishes. You'll do fine, Thomas said. I'll do more than fine. I'll do well. She set down the pen. That Mrs. Henderson taught me fine is minimum. Well is goal. Later, in the darkness, they could hear the ranch settling for night horses nickering, cowboys singing softly by the bunkhouse, wind through the cottonwoods. These sounds that had been Clara's whole world now included her differently, not as the hired girl in the room above the tack shed, but as part of the ownership, the responsibility. The future.
Are you happy? Thomas asked. I'm terrified and excited and grateful and about a dozen other things. She turned to face him in the darkness. But yes, happy? Are you no regrets about Catherine Morrison or society connections?
My only regret is that it took me so long to see what was right in front of me. Outside, a screech owl called, that lonesome sound that meant home on the prairie. Clara thought about her parents, dead these 10 years, who'd traveled west with such hope only to find early graves. They'd never imagined their orphan daughter would rise from stable girl to ranch owner's wife. But maybe they had imagined something. Why else name her Clara, meaning bright and clear, if not hoping she'd find her way to light?
Thomas.
Yes, we're going to make this work. Aren't we? Not just the marriage, but all of it, the ranch, the changes coming, the railway, everything.
Yes,
his certainty was bedrock solid.
We are.
Dawn would come soon enough, bringing the governor's visit, the challenge of proving themselves to a skeptical world, the daily work of building a life from love and labor. There would be those who'd never accept them, doors that would stay closed, invitations that wouldn't come. But there would also be this two people who'd chosen each other despite every practical argument against it, who'd bet their futures on respect and partnership rather than pedigree and profit, who understood that sometimes the greatest risk was playing it safe, and the greatest safety came from risking everything for something true. The ranch slept around them. 8,000 acres of possibility under stars that didn't care about society's rules. In the barn, horses drowsed in their stalls, including the young mare that would start Clara's own breeding line. In the bunkhouse, cowboys who'd witnessed their vows snored and dreamed of Saturday nights in town. And in the main house, Marcus sat late at his desk, perhaps finally understanding that adaptation meant more than just surviving, it meant choosing to live fully, even if that living looked nothing like what you'd planned. Clara drifted towards sleep, her hand in Thomas's, her new name settling around her like a well-fitted coat. Tomorrow she'd wake as Clara Brennan, with all the work and worry that entailed. But tonight, she was simply Clara, who'd loved a man brave enough to love her back, and that was miracle enough for any lifetime. The owl called again, and somewhere distant, a coyote answered, the conversation of wild things continuing as it always had, unchanged by human ceremonies or social expectations. Life persisting, adapting, finding its way forward against all odds. Just like them. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this journey through the Wild West. If you're listening to this story, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Thomas and Clara's story. Did their choice inspire you? What would you have done in their boots? Your stories matter too. Partners, until we meet again on the trail.